You may have heard someone say, I think all religions are basically the same. Is that an accurate statement? Can A be an A and not an A at the same time? Can a dog be a dog and a horsefly at the same time? Now, these might sound silly to say or try to imagine, but as we dive into today's questions, we will examine the fact that people sometimes hold contradictory ideas in their minds and they don't realize it. Is it arrogance or simply telling the truth to declare something to be true at the exclusion of something else? That is our work today on Truth Matters. Today, truth is denied, ignored, and resisted with open hostility. Yet in life and in times of crisis, we discover that truth matters. We're back looking at a series of questions that came to me through a friend from a skeptical acquaintance. And when I first read today's question, I took a moment to consider the size and the scope of the question. You see, the question asks, what is the evidence that only Christianity is true? To begin with, libraries of books have been written seeking to respond to this question. This question involves the full range of Christian apologetics. And I have to tell you, I wasn't sure how I could approach this subject adequately in the limited time format of Truth Matters. I wasn't hesitant because of lack of response. No, it was more the scope of the question. Now, as I've mentioned, and I've mentioned before, I don't have access to the original questioner, or I would have asked them or him some questions of my own. I'd like to know and understand what specific aspect of this question they wanted an answer to. And all I had was the question itself. And the more I read and reread the question, the more a single word began to stand out. The word was only. In other words, what is the evidence that only Christianity is true? This question, as stated, was asking more than for the simple defense of Christianity. It was questioning the very viability for exclusivity for anyone claimed to truth. There is, of course, in this world, many religions, philosophies, ideologies which shape the lives of people in this world. Why is it that only Christianity is true? One of the motivations behind my producing Truth Matters involves the mindset and worldviews currently that are dominating the world scene. With the rise of postmodern ideas and the loss of any sense of objective truth, the consequences were becoming evident, and they were becoming evident everywhere. The premise of this podcast is that truth matters. It matters in terms of how people react to truth claims and the entailing consequences that come in how people respond to the truth. Now, there is in today's question, no doubt, a desire for a defense of Christianity itself. In other words, why is it true as against others? And I will respond to that question in what I believe is the best evidence that demands a response from skeptics. But first, I wanted to tackle the aspect of the word only in the question. The question was, why is it that only Christianity is true? This question makes sense in today's thought climate, when the absence of the idea of absolute objective truth and the full-blown dominance of political correctness. I can understand the grounds from which this question arises. Any hint of a claim for any absolute truth can stir up in today's environment all kinds of things. To make such a claim, at the very least, is rude. And if there's one thing I understand about political correctness, is that it is a greater offense to be rude than immoral. You see, behavior can't be deemed immoral if each individual decides on their own and designates on their own what's right and wrong. But like I said before, to claim a moral standard as absolute is at the very least for them rude. And if a person persists, they can be labeled immoral or hateful. But let's get back to the question. The claim of exclusivity for Christianity in the climate that I've just mentioned is disturbing to the current mindset. Therefore, a cry for tolerance goes out. Now, when the word tolerance is used, it's not the older definition of the freedom to believe anything in the marketplace of ideas. No, today tolerance is the demand that all ideas are equally valid. They are equally true. Therefore, intolerance is the claim that all ideas are not equally true. But can the claim be accepted that all religions are basically the same? That they equally point to the same ultimate reality, that they are equally true? And if so, why is Christianity making such a claim to be the only true explanation for life and reality? Dr. William Lane Craig responded to just such a question. Now, I want you to listen to what he said. There are a multitude of religions in the world, and these are all mutually contradictory to one another. Although if college sophomores like to say, well, they're all true, I think anyone who has studied the world's religions understands that these cannot all be true because they make contradictory claims. He continued by discussing the differences between Islam and Buddhism. Islam claims a belief in a personal God, eternal God, who created the world, that people were responsible to him in their lives, and they would face either a heaven or a hell in how they lived their lives. Buddhism, on the other hand, has no sense of a personal God. The world is eternal. There is no such thing as heaven or hell. Sin is an illusion. He goes on to finish by saying this: ultimately, these beliefs have nothing in common, so clearly they cannot both be true. They can all be false, but they cannot all be true. That means that we have to face the difficult task of assessing what evidence and arguments can be offered on behalf of these various world religions. But how does someone do that? How do we look at the various beliefs and determine if this one is true and if another is not true? Well, some have said that all religions are fundamentally the same, but they only vary in superficial ways. But in fact, the opposite is true. You see, they seem superficially the same, but in fact, they are fundamentally different. Again, as we've heard in the quote, they could all be false, but they can't all be true. They don't say the same thing. They don't start in the same place, and they don't point to the same reality. So we're back to the question of determining, how do we know if something is true or not? Now, every worldview is built around and seeks to answer 4 questions. Questions of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. In other words, origin, and it asks the question, where did everything come from? Meaning asks, is there or what is the meaning of existence? Morality asks, how do we determine what is right and what is wrong? And destiny asks, what happens to us when and after we die? Now, by answering these 4 questions, a person builds their own view of the world that they live in and the terms of their existence. Now, in order to answer the questions of the worldview, there's 3 tests that should be required in order to determine if what they believe is in fact true. These 3 are logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and experiential relevance. Now, before I continue, I realize that in today's climate of nebulous thinking, that stating any test for truth is difficult to face. And yet, I think that once we go through these, you will see that individual tests for truthfulness, we do that all the time. It's not as complicated as it sounds. So let's go forward and look at each of these tests. The first of these tests is the test of logical consistency. What does that mean? A set of statements is logically consistent if they can all be true at the same time. A set of statements is logically inconsistent if they cannot all be true at the same time. It may also be helpful to think of logically consistency as a set of beliefs that do not contradict each other, regardless of whether they are true or not. Now, consider these statements. I am a man, I have brown hair, I have blonde hair. Now, each of these statements can all be true at the same time. No problem. They are logically consistent. Now take these two statements. All dogs are brown. Some dogs are not brown. Well, one of these statements is clearly inconsistent with the other. They can both be false, but they can't both be true at the same time. This is logical consistency. This process is practiced in every courtroom across the country and actually in personal dealings between individuals. It's not rocket science. Now, the second test is empirical adequacy. Now, what does that mean? A theory is empirically adequate if everything it says about observable entities is true, regardless of what it says about unobservable entities. In simple terms, it's asking, does what someone say agree with what is or has been observed? A person can say or believe that gravity doesn't exist for them. This idea can easily be tested by a person stepping off of a roof of a house, and then we'll see. This idea can be tested by observable criteria. Now, the third test is that of experiential relevance. Well, what does that mean? Experiential relevance is a test that asks how a worldview or a claim has relevance to one's life. For a worldview to have relevance, it would need to be one that challenges, changes, and sustains a person in good and bad times. This is another way of saying that it's livable. It works in real life. Now, we have stories and illustrations that press this point. 3 little pigs each had a house, but only one of them could withstand the onslaught of the winds from the wolf. We call something a house of cards. Why? Because it only takes one bad move and it all comes tumbling down. If something is true, it can be lived in real life under the real pressures and circumstances of life. Now, having laid these principles down, how does it fit with today's question? Remember, the question asks, what is the evidence that only Christianity is true? To begin with, there are real and fundamental differences between Christianity and all other religions. And despite attempts by someone to gloss over them, these differences are real at the foundational level. There may be some shared ideas or terms, but an honest examination will have to admit that they can't all be equally true. They might all be false, but they cannot be all equally true. It would be logically inconsistent to claim such a thing. So, the claim remaining is Christianity true? Is it logically consistent? Is it empirically adequate? Is it experientially relevant? Can I defend such a claim in the format of this podcast? Well, I believe I can by simplifying matters. I'm sure I've mentioned before the telling moment that happened in my life. I was at a university in Asia, and I was asked by a group of students that were standing around me, and one of them asked a very pointed question. The young man says, "Why are you a Christian?" It was a great question, and I told him so. Now, he didn't ask me how I became a Christian. He asked why I was a Christian. And so, looking at him and the other students that were standing around and listening, I answered him. I said, when Jesus came to this world, he said that he was God. Now, if I were to stand before you and say, my name is Emilio, I am God. And you know what happened? Some of the students grinned and a few of them chuckled. I said, exactly. You'd think he's crazy. So maybe Jesus was crazy. I mean, to claim to be God, that's pretty bold, pretty arrogant. So maybe Jesus was crazy. Or maybe Jesus was lying. I mean, people lie all the time. They don't lie in order to manipulate others or to hide something. So at this point, some of the students nodded their head. They knew what I was talking about. So I said, so maybe Jesus was crazy, or maybe he was lying, or maybe he was telling the truth. I said, you know what? You want to know why I'm a Christian? It's because I believe him. I believe he was who he said he was. I believe what he said. And I have found that everything he said has turned out to be true. Now, someone might say, yeah, but that's your own personal experience. Granted. But I know that Christianity rises or falls on Jesus. If Jesus is not who he said he was, then Christianity fails the test. But of all the things which Christianity teaches, Jesus is at the center of it all. And if there's one event that validates or undermines the whole house, it is the resurrection of Jesus. You see, Jesus told his disciples before he even traveled to Jerusalem that he would die and that he would be raised from the dead. Now, he could have told everybody that he would be raised spiritually from the dead. Because you see, by saying that, there would be no way to falsify such a claim. No one could empirically disprove it by simply showing people a dead body. But Jesus didn't say, and he didn't make such a claim. He said that he would physically rise from the dead. And all that they would need to do to disprove such a claim was to supply a body. And do not think they did not try to find a body. I mean, the record tells us that they claimed that the disciples stole the body. But why would they make such a claim? Because there was no body. Not only was there no body, but many proclaimed that they saw the risen Lord. One of the earliest testimonies in the New Testament is repeated in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8. Paul writes, "For I handed down to you of first importance what I received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, and after that he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, and then to all of the apostles. And last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me also." Listen, if Jesus rose from the dead, that changes everything. It moves from the realm of ideas, morals, and philosophies. It means there is a God. It means that he came to the earth and he died to solve our deepest and most pressing dilemma. But he didn't stay dead. He is alive. He said he's coming back. And I believe him. And he has changed my life. If he rose from the dead, then he is who he said he was. If he's the truth, and he said he was, then all others are not. Now, he doesn't force anyone to believe him. He invites you to believe him. He wants you to believe him, but he doesn't force it. Jesus said this in John 3:16-18. "For God loved the world in this way, that he gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world that he might condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. Anyone who believes in him is not condemned, but anyone who does not believe is already condemned, because he has not believed in the name of the one and only Son of God." That's the truth, and the truth matters. Thanks for watching and listening to Truth Matters. Please like, share, and subscribe to Truth Matters. It truly helps to spread and keep us going. We'll catch you next time.